All right, here we are. We are in New Orleans. We're getting ready to go do our haunted walking tour. Woo! You know, it's a very interesting. There's lots of facts here in New Orleans. You just will not believe how much history is here. Y'all need to just come down and visit and check it out for yourself. Here I am getting acquainted with our guide, you know, and she's gonna show us around tonight, and we're gonna have a good time. We're gonna learn some great, interesting facts about the history here in New Orleans. So stay tuned, and I'll get back to you when we hear something interesting. We're gonna hear something interesting, right?
You bet.
All right.
I can.
I'm sure we will. We'll get back with you. All right, y'all, you know how we do it? Here we go. Haunted walking tour, New Orleans. I was trying to get the guide to wear a microphone, but I forgot my microphone. Someone had to stick close to her. Y'all stay tuned. We'll get up here. But for now, let's just get some sights going on here. There's always musicians. Here we go. Well, this is our group. We're heading out to the haunted area. It smells like somebody just crop dusted me. More fiber, buddy. Take care of that. All right. Spiritual reading.
We have one. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much for being here, you guys. My name is Candy. I'm going to be your tour guide. So just think of us for the next 2 hours. We're just going to be friends walking around, talking. If everybody's hot, wants to make a pit stop somewhere for some drinks, it's not going to cut out of time for the stories we're going to tell, but I want everybody to still be comfortable and not get too overheated. Because I did the 5 o'clock tour and I had to sit down twice. And the people were very nice about it, thankfully. But yeah, I was just like, whoo! So I mean, I definitely understand with the heat and everything. But thank you for being here. If it weren't for people like you coming to visit the city, I would not have a job and I wouldn't be able to feed my dogs, which they would not be fans of. So thank you so much for being here. If you have any questions, comments, or emotional outbursts, anything you want me to lean more into, I'll definitely see what I can do if it's something that I can speak on intelligently to talk about. So we are starting our tour in beautiful Jackson Square. Now Jackson Square is the oldest part of our city, which is over 303 years old, which is older than the country itself, which I think is pretty interesting. Now, as you can imagine, the square now looks much different than it did back then. Mostly the statue of where Andrew Jackson stands is where our city gallows used to be. So fun for the whole family used to be coming out of church on Sundays, watching public executions happening in the square. It's a pharmacy museum. Has anyone heard about this or been here so far? It's a very cool spot. If anyone is into pharmacology, you can go in here and do it. It's under $15, definitely. I think they raised the price maybe to like around $11 to get in. But it's very, very interesting. They have some of the first medical equipment from the 1800s, which is horrifying to think about, especially from like an OBGYN standpoint. Yeah, not fun, but it's very interesting anyway. It was one of the first pharmacies in the country, and one of the first that works here. This guy, Dr. Kayla, was very much enforced. Now this is in the very early 80s. So keep in mind that this was in when we were just getting hit with the beginning of yellow fever. And yellow fever went from the early 1800s to, I believe, the last reported case in Louisiana, in New Orleans, the proper New Orleans area, was about 1904. And we lost 41,000 people due to yellow fever during that roughly 100-year time span. And we lost so many people because in the beginning they didn't know that it was transmitted through mosquitoes. They thought it was something coming off of that body, a gas referred to as a miasma. So what they used to do is tell people, hey, we're sorry about your loved one, leave them in your home because you've already been exposed to it. And then when you hear the cart driver come out, ringing the bell, to bring out your dead, do that, leave them on the sidewalk. So during spring when the mosquitoes would come back, you would have 3, 4, 5 people high stacked here on these streets waiting to be picked up. Yeah, not a good look. Not a fun time. Interestingly enough, I used to think about these car drivers and think, oh my God, what a good public service they were doing for these, for these dead people and their families. But at the same time, I mean, I knew it was an occupation, so they're getting paid for it. But what I didn't know is that they were paid per body delivery to the cemeteries. They weren't paid per body, period. So that tells you they had a vested interest in getting people to the cemeteries, really no matter what. And as you can imagine where this is going, in the early 1800s, basically the only way of telling if you were dead or not was looking at you to see if you were breathing. That was kind of the point where we're at in history. So that led to a lot of people being buried alive. And I don't want to say embarrassingly because I'm very proud of my love for Robert Englund and Freddy Krueger. And one of my oldest loves, I used to carry a Freddy Krueger doll with me when I was a little kid. And that tells you all you need to know about me and how I ended up being a tour guide in New Orleans. But yeah, one day I lost it at my house and I was like 6 years old and I lost my mind and I would not go to sleep until my mom and grandma pulled the house apart to find this stupid little doll of Freddy Krueger. But because I wouldn't sleep without him. But Robert Englund hosts a show on Discovery Plus called True Terror. And it's about like horrifying things that actually happened in history all throughout the world. And every other episode features a little portion about New Orleans. And I'm like, okay, this is horrifying and interesting. But one of the problems they had with the car driver, well, the car drivers plural, is that since they were getting paid for body delivery to the cemetery, they didn't necessarily care if someone was fully dead. That led to several drivers being brought up on actual manslaughter charges, including one of them making a statement in court, well, he was dead enough to bury. And that is word for word, which is horrifying. So pretty much as a claustrophobic person, that's one of the worst things I can think of happening. So this is the era and time that we're talking about. Awesome. We still have everybody. Good. So this is still, interestingly enough, a fully operational school. So it's always unique to see, little kids getting out and into cars and buses when there's people walking down Bourbon Street drunk at 3:30 in the afternoon. It's kind of an interesting juxtaposition. But there's 2 famous alumni that went here. John Wilkes Booth and Richard Simmons. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Not John Wilkes Booth, Lee Harvey Oswald. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, my bad. That was a little too early in history. I'm so sorry about that.
Yeah,
see, if I make a mistake, I'll correct it. So we are going to take a little break if anybody wants to just get some air conditioning really quick, grab some water or anything. We're going to stop into the blacksmith shop. It's the Feast Blacksmith Shop. It is not the oldest building in the country. It's not the oldest bar, but it's the oldest building that houses a bar. And it survived the 2 massive fires that wiped out most of the French Quarter during Spanish rule because the building itself is mostly brick, which is what it's still made out of. And you guys will be able to walk in and feel that it's very, very old. Interestingly, there are 3 alleged hauntings that take place here. One of them, so when you walk in, so we don't really know the full history of it. At one point, it most likely was a blacksmith shop. But how much blacksmithing they actually did is up for debate. But so there's a lot of history as far as what this building used to be. One of them is that it used to be a personal residence, which you'll be able to see by the layout when you guys walk in. And one of the women that we think lived there at this time still thinks she lives there. And she has one of the coolest party tricks known to man, which is she'll make her presence known by walking up behind you and whispering your name in your ear. And you'll turn around, nobody there. Yeah, and that's a no for me. But at the same time, I've been a professional drummer for most of my adult life, so she probably sees me and it's like, I'm not even gonna try. I know she's deaf. Because someone has to yell in my ear for me to hear it, especially this one. But, so there's her that hangs out there, and allegedly one of Jean Lafitte's men was taking more of the booty for himself than was his fair share. And when they found this out, they took him and shoved his face into the fireplace. And allegedly his spirit still is in there and makes its presence known by looking at you with 2 glowing red eyes when you're staring into the fire. Now I don't know how many daiquiris a person has had by this point to see this, but people also say anything with glowing red eyes in the afterlife never walked the earth in human form. And that means it's demonic in origin, and if you look at it, it will follow you home. But then again, that's the least of what can follow you home from Bourbon Street by making eye contact. So again, I always just like to say take that with a grain of salt. And then lastly, the ghost who lives there is people still say Jean Lafitte himself. And if you touch the building and say, I'm going to find Jean Lafitte's treasure, he will appear, follow you home, and fill your house with cigar smoke until you get so sick of his bullshit, you say, I'm sorry, I don't want to find your treasure. And then he will even take a cigar smoke with you. Yeah. I've never tried that. I have asthma. I don't want to mess around with that.
Right?
So we will go in there if anybody wants a drink or just get some air conditioning. And then we will meet back up by that stop sign.
What'd you say?
But this particular block of Ursulines is referred to as the Butcher Block. And that does not sound very fun to me, but we're going to get into why. So, right down there, 723 Ursulines, there lived a family in about 100 years ago. So we're talking like 1920s. Oh my God, that's more than 100 years ago now. Well, they were called the Moiety family. It was husband Henry, wife Teresa, their children, and Henry's sister-in-law named Lonnie. And she was living with them because she was currently getting divorced from Henry's brother. So they were all living together, trying to make everything work. And you know how sometimes in retrospect after something tragic happens, and obviously something did happen or I wouldn't be telling the story on the tour. So after something tragic happens, a lot of people like to say things like, oh, we never saw that coming, they were such a happy family. That was not anything people would have said about the Moiety family. Yeah, they knew, like basically when something happened, they were like, okay, they hated each other. So that was really only a matter of time. So because Henry was a known drunk, and so he would lose his jobs very often, and Teresa and Lonnie would have to work odd jobs as seamstresses and things like that to make ends meet. And so they basically were looking for any out they could, not the one they ended up getting, unfortunately, but Teresa was actively having an affair with the married real estate agent that lived below them, because it was a split level at this time. So I mean, at least she didn't have to travel far to have her affair, but her plan was eventually to leave, run away with this guy after Lonnie was out and safe too. But one day, their housekeeper arrives, and normally Teresa was awake, the kids were running around if they hadn't already gotten off to school, and boys were around, things like that. You know, you looked like a family was living there. This morning though, that was not the case. They walked into the house, and they immediately noticed telltale red stains on the ground. Yeah, and in a very rare smart move for some of these stories, they got out of there immediately. She tracked down the first people she saw walking down the street, and she said, I'm paraphrasing, hey, I think something really bad happened in here. Can you go in here with me? So I don't have to walk into this alone. And they did. They walked in. First thing they noticed was, again, the telltale red stains. They walked into the master bedroom looking for Teresa, and unfortunately they found her in pieces. She was dismembered, haphazardly shoved into her steamer trunk, and on the back of her body there was a large gash where they found her wedding ring shoved inside. So yeah, so I'm not trying to malign the men here on this tour. Y'all are lovely, but just, you know, we've all watched Snapped. The first people that they're going to look at is going to be looking for the husband, especially since he was nowhere to be seen. So then they walked into the spare room, which was Lonnie's room, and they found her.
Why are they looking at me?
And unfortunately, she didn't have the wound in her back where her wedding ring had been shoved, but she had obvious, you know, defense marks on her arms, face, things like that. So they found her also in her steamer trunk. That's going to be the pattern of the Butcher Block of Ursulines, the steamer trunks, and you guys will see why by the end of the next story. So what happened was, they immediately started looking for Henry because he was nowhere to be found. The kids, people like to ask about the kids, they were not harmed or murdered. They actually were dropped off by Henry's brother. So then they ended up, you know, I mean, I don't know what kind of a life they ended up having when their family had such a very publicized double homicide. But Henry was caught hiding outside of the city in the swamp, as any innocent man would. And his first story that he tried to tell the police was that it was a red-headed Norwegian sailor that committed the murders. And anyone that's heard anyone lie to them knows that anyone if they're gonna be that specific, it's probably, yeah, they're probably full of it. So they pushed him a little harder, and he collapsed like a house of cards. He starts crying. He admits that he was the one that killed Teresa because she told him she was leaving him for her married boyfriend, and he couldn't handle that. He killed her. Lonnie woke up during the attack, so he killed her as well. Now, you'd think that would be just one horrendous, you know, dismemberment murder that happened on this street, but you'd be wrong. So that leads us to the house behind me, which is 735 Ursulines. And it's sat empty for quite some time now. There's someone actually living there. And about 2002, there was a couple that lived here named John Morgan and Polly Pastore. Now, they both worked at that little quartermaster, that corner store, and they worked the graveyard shift because that place is open 24/7, which is a really nice thing to have. Because, I mean, okay, so this is just me being petty, but like it annoys me how early things close down in the French Quarter. Like I love a good po' boy every now and again, but not every single time if I have to work past 10 o'clock at night. But, so they both worked there. Again, this is 2002, so people knew them. It's not all that old of a story. I mean, it's old to me because I graduated high school in 2002, and then I hear people that were born in 2002 now can legally drink, and I'm like, oh dear. But this happened in 2002, and one day, Polly stopped showing up to work. Also, just a little side note about John Morgan. His last name by birth was not Morgan, his surname. He had it changed because he was such a fan of Captain Morgan the pirate. Yeah, not the pirate. Well, he was a pirate initially, but you know, the rum guy? Yeah, the rum pirate. So that's what
Spiced rum.
And he was known to be very mean drunk, and probably, you know, like to drink too. But again, I'm not saying that with any kind of judgment whatsoever, because when you live in the French Quarter or in New Orleans in general, you kind of end up in a little bit of a cycle with it sometimes. So one day she stopped showing up for work. And sadly, people didn't think that it was all that odd because they knew their relationship was very tumultuous. And the story he told when he went to work was, oh yeah, Polly, you know, she finally had her last straw with him. She got mad, left him, and she went back to her parents' house. And okay, fine. But what ticks me off about this story is that it was 2002. You know, Polly had like a MySpace or something, so someone could have reached out to her. And another red flag was he allegedly told their employers, oh, she said, don't worry about her last paycheck, she's not going to need it. I found $5 on the ground last week that I'm pretty sure had horse poop on it, and I was fine with it because it was $5. So like, who's not going to need their last paycheck, especially if you're starting your life over, you know? So, but time went by. No one really heard anything from Polly again. There's a reason why. And eventually, he moves. When they saw him moving, he was loading a large steamer trunk into a moving van. No big deal. You know, I mean, apparently those are very common. Also, a funny side note, when I was just a baby tour guide, I've been doing this for years. My like second or third tour in, I was really nervous. I had an older lady named Marceline. I'm not making that name up because I kept thinking of Adventure Time, and she hated me. Like, her daughters wanted to do the tour, but she was not having any of it. And like everything she, like before the tour started, she walked up to me and said, just so you know, I hate all of this and I think it's fake. I'm like, okay, this is gonna be a lot of fun. And then by the time we got to this story, I didn't really know what a steamer trunk was, because now I've seen them at thrift stores and things like that because they're pretty common. But I said kind of like a hope chest. And she goes, actually, that's not true. And I said, take it, Marceline. So then I got an interesting history lesson about what a steamer trunk is. And turns out it's much more bigger than a hope chest. It can be waterproof. It can be airtight, because that's made for people to actually have traveled across the Atlantic Ocean on. So I got school on steamer trunks from her, and I'm very grateful for that, because that turns into why he was able to do what he did with the steamer trunk. So he moves into a new house in Elysian Fields with a girlfriend. He managed to find another girlfriend, and then Hurricane Katrina hits in 2005. Like most people did when he got his evacuation fund, he took off, and then when the floodwaters receded, the landlord of that new place went through his place to see what the damage was, see if there's anything you could recoup for losses, and he found the steamer trunk. Opened it up, and guess who was inside? Yeah, the then, by that time, mummified and dismembered corpse of Polly. Yeah. And it's actually, when you Google it and look it up, it's a very sad story, because she didn't have a very good relationship with her parents, and her father had been a retired police captain where they were from, and when they found her body, they found her with wearing her dad's old police shirt, and he'll never forgive himself for not looking harder for her. He just thought she didn't want to talk to him, and I can't imagine how that was. But people said that you could sometimes see her looking out the window of this house. But that was before it was occupied. Obviously, now people have the shutters to close. So. Also, just a little funny like side note, there was a woman that used to live over there, but they shared this gateway to the courtyard, and she would randomly walk by, and I said, hi, how's it going? And one of the people in my ghost tour, this was a pub crawl, so people were kind of team any martinis by that time, and the lady said, who are you? And she goes, I'm Polly, and it was just perfect. Are there any questions, comments, or emotional outbursts about the Butch Flock of Ursulines? Who has seen American Horror Story Coven and knows kind of who she is roughly? That's okay. I kind of love that, because they really took a lot of leeway with her story. We'll just say that. So, but and interestingly enough, the actual Delphine was so much worse than the show actually portrayed, because the show, and she's played by Kathy Bates in the show. We love Aunt Kathy. She's amazing. You know, this is no Kathy Bates slander on this tour, but. They gave her a redemptive arc, which we really feel like she did not deserve in any way, shape, or form. And if I tell the story properly, I think you guys will feel the same way. So, Delphine was born to a very wealthy family in the early 1800s. And you sometimes might hear people kind of rewrite history and say things like, oh, she was born into poverty, and then she married wealthy and worked her way up in society. That's not true. She was born wealthy, and just continued to marry wealthier and wealthier. Just kept working her way up the food chain. At the age of 13, she married her first husband, which is actively disgusting. And I hate the expression "those were the times," because I'm not going to make excuses for people marrying off the teenage girls. I don't care if you were middle-aged then. But so then she marries a guy who was a Spanish dignitary, and he dies at sea somewhere near Cuba. So he's out of the picture. Husband number 2 comes along, and she marries him, and then he dies under mysterious circumstances. This leads to people whispering about her possibly being a black widow, and maybe she was. But this guy was actually a slave trader, so we don't care about that. If she did one good thing in her life, it was that. But then we're gonna move on to the actual horrible things we know she did, which involves husband number 3. And that was Dr. Leonard Louis Laborie. So he was a surgeon. He just moved here from Paris, and he was very wealthy, very renowned in his field. She had her money from her family, husband number 1 and number 2. So they marry each other. They automatically become one of the wealthiest families in the city, if not the wealthiest. So in 1841, they build this house. And it was built as, and still remains, the biggest single family owned home in the French Quater. Now, not the Garden District, mind you, because in the Garden District, that's where like our mansions are. That's where like Sandra Bullock and Beyonce have their houses and everything. But as far as the French Quarter goes, this is still the biggest. So then, they were known for having opulent parties that would have multi-course meals for the cream of New Orleans society, anywhere from like 3 to 5 nights a week, where she'd change her gown multiple times. It was like the definition of 1800s extra. So all this was going on, and people noticed there was something very weird going on in this house because her staff of enslaved people was changing on a somewhat weekly basis, and that was not a normal thing. And people would talk behind their back.
Isn't this the place where if you were to stay, you'd see like people with chains?
You can see that still happening to this day. Like if someone, it's one of those things that, oh, if it's not affecting me, I'm not necessarily gonna say anything about it because I don't want to have my party.
You used to be able to stay here, and like
before
and there was like rumors that people would say that you could
that I'm
hear
going to tell you guys
chains
about
throughout the
happened.
halls, and that the slaves
About
actually, like,
a year and a
chained
half
them.
before, so we're talking 1842, there was a young enslaved girl. People think her name was Leah. She was anywhere between the ages of 7 to 11, and I hate that we don't know more about her because this was a human being that had her own life. But the records of enslaved people are notoriously terrible here. And so we tell people stories because the city was built on the backs of enslaved people, and if we don't tell their story, we are not doing them the service that they needed when they were alive. So this little girl was brushing Madame's hair one morning and caught a knot in her hair. Delphine lost her marbles at such a degree, she leans down, grabs a bullock that was next to her, starts chasing this little girl around the balcony on the 2nd floor, and this little girl was terrified. So she jumped off the balcony and died in the middle of the street. Delphine sent people out to collect her little body and bury her in the courtyard before anybody could see this, but it was still a busy courtyard. So I mean, because it was still the center of the city then, like it is today, so people saw this. And do you guys want to know how they find her? $300. Which is horrific. And that was nothing for Delphine with her money. And what they did also as punishment is they took away 7 of her enslaved people. And Delphine was such a petty and despicable person, she sent her lawyer, who lived next door, right here at this house, down to the auction to buy those exact 7 human beings back and have them brought back to this house. And I hate telling that story, but I think it really shows how despicable and petty she was.